It has been a while since I've put up a research summary, and I read this article last week. It is a publication from this year, 2024, that I thought was super interesting, and I thought I would share it. After we got booted off of YouTube, I did have people reach out and say that they did enjoy some of the research summaries, so we're going to try and start that up. So the title of this journal article is The Influence of Race on Detected and Undetected Sexual Offense Histories, and it is a comparison of white men and black men committed as sexually violent persons. So again, we're really looking at detected versus undetected victims and the influence of race on this. When it comes to sexual offending, we do know there are some differences when it comes to race. And again, this is specifically looking at white men and black individuals. So what do we know from the data is that white individuals with a history of sexual offending do pretty consistently exhibit more paraphilic sexual interests, and black individuals tend to exhibit more general criminality. So no one has really looked at detected versus undetected offenses and whether this differs by race. The overall study aims were to examine whether there were differences between black and white men in reference to the type of sex offenses they committed, the characteristics of their victims, and the differences in the rate of victims that resulted in formal sanctions, so that would be a charge, a conviction, and those victims that went undetected. There's a lot of discussion in our profession about detected versus undetected victims, right? Victims of sexual offenses, particularly often when you look at recidivism studies. We have known recidivism from studies for types of sexual offending, and the question is always, well, that's known recidivism, right? A sex offense has to be detected in order for us to count it, and so this has become sort of more of a focus of study recently to kind of figure out how the heck do we figure out detection rates, right? And so quantifying undetected sexual offending is super difficult, right? We can really only do that in people who were, have a detected victim, because, most random people off the street are not going to confess to committing a sex crime. And when you look at what studies are out there, the data is vastly different. So depending on the study that you look at, some people have calculated true rates of sexual offending to be 1.2 to 30 times higher than known offending rates. So that's a massive, it's a massive gap from 1.2% to 30 times higher. So it's very important to get some data in this area. I've added this here because I found this to be super interesting. I think it's pretty common knowledge from the data, right, that black individuals are arrested and incarcerated significantly greater than white individuals, but I had personally never seen any of that data looking at race and what race means for whether we report or we don't report sex crimes. And I just put this up here because it was my first exposure to the term cultural betrayal trauma theory, which I will now be diving into. And we're just going to quote this: the multi-level sociocultural context and anti-black racism oppresses black girls and women from reporting sexual abuse committed by black boys or men. The broader racist culture creates a stronger bond and intra-cultural trust among black communities. When a black man or boy has sexually abused a black woman or girl, the betrayal of this intracultural trust makes the harm within the group, which is already marginalized, more costly. The within-group trust and bond creates a pressure on the victims to keep the problems in the house, keep it in the family, to protect the black community from the dominant culture and system from oppression. Reporting the abuse risks further rejection, alienations, or threats from within the community for the victim. And the need of the victim is often overshadowed by the needs of the offender and the entire marginalized group. So I just thought this was a super interesting way to look at, why perhaps minorities don't report in the larger social context of, racism and oppression in definitely in the United States and perhaps in some other Western countries. So the specific research questions. 1. Is there a difference between the number of detected and undetected sexual offense victims reported by white and black men who were committed as a sexually violent predator or person, depending on the language of the state you're in? Is there a difference between black and white men regarding their age at first arrest for sexual offense and whether they already were known to the criminal justice system due to general offending? So was their first arrest a sex crime, or were they arrested for things prior to committing a sex crime? Do black versus white men have less opportunities to sexually reoffend due to differences in punishment and sanctions? Again, looking at disparities in the criminal justice system, perhaps there's differences in recidivism for black men just because they're getting longer sentences, right? And they're not out long enough in order to have opportunities to reoffend. Are there differences between white and black men with regard to the type of detected and undetected victims they have sexually offended against? And do white and black men differ in terms of their assessed risk for reoffense? So this was an archival study, meaning they weren't talking to the individuals in person. They went back through files and through records. They were all men who had been civilly committed in Wisconsin under their sexually violent person law, and they were all treated at one particular facility, which was the Sandridge Secure Treatment Center. This was men who were in that treatment center from 2001 to 2017. There were 139 white men in this sample and 51 black men. Just some general information about the sample. On average, the general first offense occurred in young adulthood for both black and white individuals, the mean being 20. And the majority of the folks had 2 releases back into the community. And so that would be perhaps I don't exactly know how the Wisconsin program works, but they would finish whatever they needed to do in Wisconsin, be released back into the community, reoffend, or have some kind of sanction that would put them back into the program. So the majority of individuals in this sample had that happen twice. So how do we find out undetected versus detected offenses from a file review? So the available data for these gentlemen that were in this program, they had sexual history disclosures, which is part of their program. They had polygraph testing, where you often people will talk about an undetected offense. Offense histories, they also had access to all of their criminal and court information, so they would know their records, what they'd been charged for. And each person, since they were contact offenders, did have a static 99R coded at the time of each release. So every time they left, they had a static 99 score done. So what are our results? So there were 807 detected victims in this sample population. And that led to 1 or more sanctions in the sample. So these are known victims, right? So 1 or more arrests. There were no differences between the black men and the white men on the average number of detected victims. But white men had significantly more undetected victims than black men. So the undetected victims was more prevalent in the white male community than the black male community in this population. The white men in this population also had significantly more child victims, and more child victims that were undetected than the black men. Other results they found were that black men had significantly more detected adult victims, but they did not differ from the white men in the population on undetected adult victims. White men had significantly more undetected male victims, significantly more acquaintance victims than the black men. Pedophilia diagnoses were also more likely to be given to white men, and sadism diagnoses were likely to be given to black men. Unfortunately, they talked about this in the discussion. There wasn't a ton of information for them to really dig into that sadism diagnosis and why those were made. And again, another result was that antisocial personality disorder diagnoses were more likely to be given to black men than the white men. Since these were contact offenses, they did have static 99 scored. The black men had significantly higher static 99 scores at both first release and final incarceration. And again, that's not always surprising. If they're higher scores on antisocial personality disorder, they often have more criminal histories, which increases their static 99 score. White men on the static 99 had significantly higher scores on persistent paraphilia than the black men. And the black men, again, as I kind of just stated, had significantly higher scores on the general criminality items. So as a generality, in the results, they talked about what significantly predicts race or ethnicity of the committed man, the committed person. And so for each adult victim, the odds of the committed male being white decreased by 31%. So the detected victims, the black male members of this population had the majority of the adult victims. The black men in the sample had a higher proportion of victims who were officially detected by law enforcement than white men. So this is an interesting finding, differences by race of detected and undetected. So about 60% of the victims of sexual offenses committed by black men were detected. So 60% of them were known. That number for white men was only about 39%. So the majority of victims of white men were undetected. And again, some of the reasons that they hypothesized for that was, again, the disparities in policing, and perhaps black men had more police contact, and therefore things were more, offenses were detected more often than the white men. But again, no causality was suggested. So some final conclusions. White men definitely showed more pedophilic sexual interest in behaviors than black men. White men had significantly more total detected and undetected child victims, more male total victims, undetected male victims, total acquaintance victims, and a higher proportion of pedophilic disorder diagnoses than black men. They also had higher scores on the static 99 for the pedophilia issues. Anytime we're talking about research, we do have to acknowledge what the limitations might be for the study. For this study, clearly, you're looking at a population of men who are civilly committed, so that's a small number to begin with. And this population did have a small number of black men in the sample. The data set was missing some details that talked about the diagnoses. So this would, again, they really particularly talked about this in terms of the sadism diagnosis. They didn't have much information on that. They just kind of had a diagnosis written. Again, this study was limited to contact sexual offenses, so any of the online only non-contact offending, CSAM, online solicitation, etc., weren't part of this. And again, it was also a highly selected sample of individuals who were designated as an SVP. So not sure, again, how generalizable this is, but it is very much an interesting study to look at detected and undetected victims, and something that we need to really start looking at and researching. So it's a good first delve into this. And here is your reference for anyone who wishes to go read the study. I found it super interesting. It is Kelley, Kahn, and Zaw, published this year in 2024 in the journal Sexual Abuse, the Influence of Race on Detected and Undetected Sexual Offense Histories, a comparison of white and black men committed as sexually violent persons.